Do you ever get nervous before you preach? Do you ever get nervous before a sermon? It's actually very common. And in this video, I'm going to talk about exactly why we get nervous before any kind of public speaking. And then I want to talk about the 3 things that make me nervous when I preach that you probably will relate to. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to give you 5 proven tactics that I've used to try to overcome nervousness in my own preaching. It's worked for me, and I think it's going to work for you, so stick around for that. My name is Lane. This is Preaching Donkey. It's so awesome to be with you today. If you would, I want to put something in your hands. It's the 21-day guide to creating killer sermons. If you go to preachingdonkey.com/21 days, you can pick up your free copy there. It'll take you through a 3-week process of how to create a masterful sermon. And so you can take what we're learning today about not being nervous, you can take all that we're going to learn doing that and apply it to what you learn in the PDF guide on how to create killer sermons, and you'll be well on your way to a better preaching experience. So go to preachingdonkey.com/21 days and you can pick your copy up there. So do you ever get nervous when you preach? I remember when I first started preaching, I was very nervous. And the more I preached, the bigger the audiences got, the bigger the expectation was, and the more it meant a lot that I did a good job. And I would find myself becoming very nervous. In fact, one time I remember I was about to preach and I was standing on the front row, and I was with my wife during the worship set, minutes before I'm going to get up and preach. And she takes my hand, just kind of holds my hand, and she leans over and she says, "Your hand is freezing." She's like, "Are you nervous?" And I was like, "Yeah, I am," which was hard for her to understand at that point because when I got up to preach, it looked natural and normal and like I really enjoyed being up there, and I do, but that doesn't mean I wasn't nervous before getting up there. And that's what a lot of preachers experience and a lot of public speakers experience as well, that we can become very nervous, not because we think we're going to do badly, not because we're not prepared, but just because we just are nervous. In fact, there is an article from Psychology Today called "Why Are We Scared of Public Speaking?" And there's a few points from this that I thought were pretty interesting. One question it asked is, why are we afraid of public speaking? The fear of public speaking is not so much related to the quality of a speech as it is to how the speaker feels, thinks, or acts when faced with speaking in public. There are many reasons why people become afraid when having to speak in public. The theories exploring fear of public speaking have identified 4 contributing factors, which it identifies as physiology, thoughts, situation, and skills. And so before I get into those things, I just want to point out that the first thing that it said, the fear of public speaking, is not so much related to the quality of a speech as it is to how the speaker feels, thinks, or acts when faced with public speaking. So it's more about how you feel about the speech itself, or in our case, how you feel about the sermon, than it is about how good the sermon actually is. So if you can train yourself to feel differently, that'll go a long way. We're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. I really think that the situation is pretty interesting. So it talks about a few contributing factors to the situational nervousness you might fear. Lack of experience. So if you just haven't given a whole lot of sermons, haven't done a whole lot of public speaking, you can find yourself nervous. The degree of evaluation. To what extent are your words and presentation going to be scrutinized by others? The status difference, okay? The higher the status is, the more it's going to cause you to be nervous. New ideas, okay? This is the idea that these ideas are just sort of fresh to you, and so it makes you nervous, kind of this idea that what if I don't get it right? And then a new audience. It's just an audience that you're not completely acquainted with yet. All of those things can contribute to the nervousness of public speaking in general. Now, when I think about what makes me nervous before a sermon, and you may have been able to relate to some of those general public speaking nervousness from that Psychology Today article, which I'll link below in the description, you might be able to relate to that. But when it comes to preaching, there's a few things, there's actually three things that make me nervous before any sermon, and I'll tell you exactly what they are. The first thing is if I don't feel adequately prepared. So if I didn't get adequate time to spend preparing to preach, I feel it before the sermon and during the sermon. For me, this is a spiritual issue. It's my duty to prepare well for every sermon I deliver. There's nothing spiritual about depending on the Holy Spirit to work through me when I didn't prepare well to begin with. So I think for me, if I just know I could have prepared more, that can make me nervous. Number two, the subject matter is going to be difficult for me to preach and difficult for them to hear. This is an interesting one. I have had, over the course of my preaching career, I've had to deal with some pretty hot topics. And I dealt with those. The Bible would address them, so I would. But sometimes I would walk into it thinking, I don't know how these people are going to deal with this. And that can increase the level of nervousness. So if you are going to preach on something that you know might be difficult for your audience to receive, and even for you to preach because you feel like this could get clunky if I'm not very careful with how I handle this, then that can make you nervous as well. And then number three, if I'm too concerned about what they'll think about me. So preachers want to be liked. Most people want to be liked. But the pastor profession tends to attract a disproportionate amount of people. Okay? We got into this work because we love people and we want them to know God and we want them to follow Jesus. And so there's this tendency, there's this weird symbiotic relationship between you and your listeners, between you and your church, where you stand up there and it's kind of like a performance. It's not supposed to be, but it kind of is in the sense that you're trying to win and keep their attention, and they're willing to give it to you if you have something interesting to say. And so it is this kind of you need them and they need you. And what can happen is you can find yourself performing instead of serving. And what I like to think about, if I'm ever in this kind of place where I feel so much like I just want them to like me or want them to think I'm doing well, I have to shift my perspective from I'm not performing, I'm serving. Don't perform for people, even though you are on a stage, okay, and there is an audience, and it eerily looks a lot like a performance, and it can feel like that, and it has performance-like elements. Don't default to performing, default to serving, okay? Serve people well. Don't perform for them. Serve them. Give them what they need. So those three things, if I'm not adequately prepared, if the subject matter is going to be difficult for me to preach and for them to hear, and if I'm too concerned about what they'll think of me. You might have different things that make you nervous. Maybe something from the list of the article that we read earlier, or maybe from these three things that I've identified in my preaching. I want to give you 5 ways to overcome nerves before you preach. So whatever makes you nervous could be any number of things. Could be that perhaps you're inexperienced. Could be that you have somewhat of a hostile audience where you always get negative feedback, or whatever the case may be. I don't know what it is for you, but I want to show you 5 ways to overcome nerves before you preach, and particularly before any given sermon. So this is going to be really helpful because before any sermon, you can kind of do these things, and this is something I've done to help navigate and manage nervousness. The first thing is this: find a quiet place to review your notes. So this is a must for me. Some Sundays, I used to preach 3 times in a row. Now I preach 2 times in a row. But before the first service, I need about 5 minutes alone to collect my thoughts. So all this is just to look at my notes one last time right before I preach. Now, my method of study has me reviewing, preaching my sermon, recording it, reviewing what I recorded, listening to it, watching it. So again, that feeling adequately prepared, I always feel adequately prepared because I just don't let that be a thing. One time I saw Craig Rochelle was being interviewed. He's the pastor of Life Church. And somebody said, "Hey, do you ever find yourself writing your sermon last minute, like on Saturday?" And he just said, "No, never. Not one time." And I thought that was pretty cool. Instead of him saying, "Oh yeah, sometimes I get to the last minute and I'm up all night." And he just said, "No, I just don't let that happen. Just don't." And I really love that. And I've really tried to embrace that. So I never go into a sermon, okay, not feeling adequately prepared. However, you can still find yourself feeling nervous, okay, because you're about to get up and do something important. Preaching is important work. So find a quiet place and review your notes. That's number one. Number two, think about your opening words and practice saying them. I'm a firm believer in rehearsing my sermons. Like I said, I have a whole system. I'll talk about it in a future video. I use the voice memo app on my phone to record my sermon on Thursdays for time and content. When I practice how I'm going to say, what I'm going to say, it makes a huge difference. So what I do is I do all that, but then right before the sermon, I think about, and I might even practice saying my opening words. And what this does is it reduces the nervousness, because a lot of times when you're nervous, what you're nervous about is the unknown, okay? Your brain needs a plan. It does not like unknown things. So if you can train yourself and train your brain to know, okay, when I step onto the stage, these are the first words I'm going to say. I don't have to think about that, because it's kind of like a object in motion. It takes a lot of force to move a sitting object, but then once you move it, it can pretty much stay in motion with a lot less momentum. Sermon's very much the same way. If you can just get moving, then you can kind of keep moving and work into your sermon, and some of that nervousness subsides. But you have to know what you're going to say first, and you got to prepare that ahead of time. So think about the opening words that you're going to say, and this will reduce the uncertainty that you have regarding the beginning of your message and calm your nerves. Number three, think less about yourself, think more about your listeners. And I talked about this a lot earlier, that you are not the point. When you are nervous about what people are going to think of you, it's a good indication that you are thinking too much about you, okay? Your sermon is for the benefit of the hearer, not the advancement of your ego. So I have benefited from quoting this verse to myself. I'm going to say it to you. It's Galatians 1:10, where Paul asks this rhetorical question of himself. And here's what he says: am I now trying to win the approval of men or of God? Or am I still trying to please men or people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Sometimes what I have to do is I have to say, I'm not trying to win these people's approval. As much as I want it, and as much as I know that it's valuable to me, it's ultimately not my aim. My aim is to please the Lord and be faithful to Him by serving them and proclaiming the gospel. And I want to do that the best way I can. I want to do that with excellence, and I want to do it with passion. But I'm not doing it so that I can look good. So you got to think less about yourself, and you got to think more about your listeners. What do they need? What serves their needs? What serves God's purpose for them? So the first thing we're going to do is find a quiet place to review our notes. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to think about our opening words and practice saying them. Just so we know the first 30 seconds, the first 40 seconds, what we're going to say. Number three, we're going to think less about ourselves and think more about our listeners. It's not going to be about us. We're going to kind of empty ourselves of that pressure and think about our listeners. Number four, and this is perhaps my favorite, if you could get this, if nervousness is something that you struggle with, if nervousness is something that you're like, I would love to preach more, I would love to be better at this, but I just get nervous, then number four is for you. Here it is. You ready? Channel your nervous energy into passion for your content. This is huge. Nothing is more contagious than passion. And your listeners desperately want to be inspired. Okay, this is something that I've learned about people through 15 years of preaching and pastoring. People are desperate to be inspired. They want to have hope. They want to know that tomorrow has something for them, that God has a plan for them. And as cliche as that sounds, it's just true. And so if you, as the preacher, can show them with passion and with vision, this is where God wants to take us, it can go a long way. And so take that nervous energy that's inside of you and just begin to use that nervousness as a gift of extra energy to expend during your sermon. Channel it into passion and preach with boldness and energy, okay? So if you can do that, what you can realize is that, here's the thing, you're nervous because what you're about to do matters. you're preaching the gospel. You're declaring the most important message in the world. So of course you're nervous. Of course you can get nervous. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. So take that nervous energy and use it, okay? In the Psychology Today article that I referenced, that's going to be linked below, it talks in the physiology section about how your body, it's almost like what happens chemically is the same response as when you feel threatened, okay? Like you're in a back alley and you hear somebody behind you, and you get this adrenaline rush so you can run away or fight, fight or flight. The same kind of thing happens when you get up in front of a group of people to speak, okay? So you have a heightened sense of energy, a heightened adrenaline. Use that into passion for what you're going to teach. So quiet place to review your notes. Think about your opening words. Think less about yourself. Think more about your listeners. Channel your nervous energy into passion for your content. Number 5, perhaps the most important of all, pray like crazy. It's my favorite part of nervousness because nervousness always prompts me to pray. And so I feel close to God in the moments when I'm most nervous and dependent on Him. And so I find myself in those moments before I get up to preach, if it's something that I'm nervous about for whatever reason, I can just say, God, this is your church. These are your people. Just allow me to be a vessel used by you. And I just, there's something supernatural that just kind of washes over me where I get released from some of that nervousness. And so I want the same for you. And so the next time you preach and you're nervous, do these 5 things. And I think what you'll find is that some of that nervousness can be channeled into passion, and the rest of it might just kind of wash away as you're able to just lean on what you've studied because you prepare well. Okay, you've used the 21-day guide to creating killer sermons. You're going through that, and you are ready to kind of take on the challenge and tackle what's in front of you, and you're not worried about yourself. You're not worried about your nervousness, okay? It takes time, it takes experience, it takes practice, but the next time you preach, if nervousness is something you deal with, do these 5 things, okay? Find the 1 or 2 or 3 that really work for you and do them as a ritual, as a practice. Always practice your opening words. Find a quiet place to review your notes, okay? Pray. Train yourself to not think about you. As soon as you start to feel like you're getting nervous, what are they going to think? Don't think about you. Think about them. What do they need? Where are their lives? Where are they at? What are they going through? Okay, and lead all of that into praying for them, not even for yourself. Pray for them before you get up to speak. Pray that you can serve them. And I think what you're going to find is, are you ever going to overcome nervousness? No, because there's always going to be different levels and different situations and different things that happen, and you can't always predict that. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're not a good speaker. It means that you care. It means that you feel like this is important. It is not. I had one prominent author I met with one time when I was writing my first book, and I was showing him the book, and he's written a couple, 2 or 3, I don't know, probably 10 books at this point actually. But a couple of them have sold really well. He's sold about 2 million books total. And so he's meeting with me, and he sees I'm writing this book, and I kind of ask him, hey, can you tell me what you think? And he sees on my website the very first article on Preaching Donkey that was up at that point, not the first article ever, but the one that was showing at that point was an article about how to overcome nerves when you preach. And he looked at me and he said, I got to be honest, there's a lot of pastors who are just not going to connect with this because they don't get nervous. I mean, I don't understand how you think this is an issue. And it was just kind of funny to me because I thought, I work with so many pastors and so many preachers, especially new preachers and younger preachers who do struggle with nervousness, but even seasoned veterans go through times where they think, I'm going to deal with an issue that I haven't dealt with before. Or, gosh, I can't connect anymore with the younger generation, and it makes them nervous when they're in their church, and they want to make sure they do a good job and reach them, or whatever the case. So just the thought that nervousness only kind of tackles or only affects young, inexperienced preachers is just not true. So all that to say, if you are nervous at times, don't let that be a discouragement to you. Channel that nervousness into passion for your content. Channel that nervousness into a motivation to pray and lean on the Holy Spirit's power, and then get up and preach like there's no tomorrow. And then the next week, get up and do it again. And eventually what you'll find is that some of those things that make you nervous right now will kind of fade away. And later there will be a whole nother set of things that might make you nervous then. And that's totally fine. It's all part of it. It's what makes it fun. It's what makes it exhilarating. It's what makes it worthwhile. So with that, I want to ask you in the comments below, what makes you nervous before you preach, and how do you overcome nervousness? If you want more videos like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I can't wait to interact with you in the comments on those 2 questions. And again, go to preachingdonkey.com/21days to get your guide to 21 day guide to creating killer sermons. And I will see you in the next video.